They kicked me out at 16 to give my room to my pregnant twin, and now they're suing me for the house I bought. I laughed out loud. It wasn't a chuckle, it was that kind of laugh you let out when something's too insane to cry over. I held the letter in my hand, the official seal staring back like some twisted joke. My sister, Rachel, was taking me to court. Her claim that my house, the one I worked 3 jobs to afford, should be shared family property. I hadn't seen her in years, not since the night I was forced to pack up my belongings and sleep in a freezing tent in our backyard while she got my bed, my room, my life, because she was having a baby at 16. Figure it out, my parents had said. You're a man now. So I did. I built myself from nothing, scraped by, bled, earned every inch of the life I now have. And suddenly, they all want back in, smiling like we're one big happy family, acting like the past didn't happen. But I remember every freezing night, every time they pretended I didn't exist, every betrayal, and I'm not the same boy they kicked out. They're about to find out just how much I've changed. Before everything went to hell, there was love, or at least what I thought was love. Rachel and I were twins, 2 halves of one story. When we were kids, people couldn't tell us apart. We'd trade clothes just to mess with our teachers. She was always louder, always braver, but she never left me behind. When we were 7, she punched a kid for stealing my sandwich. I thought that meant something. Back then, I believed in us, in family, in loyalty. Our parents weren't perfect, but we had moments. Christmas mornings with hot cocoa and mismatched socks. Movie nights on a creaky couch where we'd pile under one blanket and argue over popcorn flavors. Mom sang old Fleetwood Mac songs in the kitchen. Dad taught us how to ride bikes and pretended not to cry when we fell. But the heart of it all was Grandpa. Grandpa was everything good, wrapped in flannel shirts and cologne that smelled like sawdust and mint. He lived just a few blocks away, but it felt like another world. His world. Quiet, warm, steady. Every weekend I'd ride my bike to his porch, and he'd be there, 2 mugs of cocoa waiting, a tackle box already packed. Patience, Ethan, he'd say, watching my line twitch. The best things come when you stop chasing and start listening. I listened to him a lot. He talked about kindness like it was armor, about dignity, about knowing when to speak up and when to walk away. He called me his quiet soldier. Rachel didn't go fishing much. She liked being home, helping Grandma bake. She was good at people, good at getting attention. Me, I just wanted to feel like I mattered somewhere. With Grandpa, I did. I still remember the day he gave me his old pocket knife. Said it had seen more sunrises than most people. Yours now, he smiled, for when you need to remember who you are. I kept that knife, still have it. Back then, Rachel and I still shared secrets. She'd sneak into my room at night and whisper about boys she liked, teachers she hated, dreams she had. We used to make promises, how we'd always have each other's backs, how no matter what happened, we'd never take sides against each other. And I believed her. God, I believed her. Even when things started shifting, when the praise came easier for her and the criticism landed harder on me, I still clung to the memory of who we were. We were twins. We were supposed to be unbreakable. But memory is fragile. Love is fragile. And sometimes the people who promise to protect you are the ones who throw you to the wolves. It didn't happen all at once. There was no announcement that I was now second place. No flashing sign that I'd become the afterthought. It came like rust, quiet, creeping, and impossible to ignore once you finally saw it. The first time I noticed, I was 12. Rachel had asked for a new dress for her piano recital, and she got it, a brand new sparkly thing with lace and ribbons. I asked for a new pair of sneakers because mine had holes in the soles. Mom told me we couldn't afford it that month. You'll grow out of them soon anyway, she said, without even looking up. It stung, but I told myself I was being sensitive. Then came the birthdays. Rachel's were events streamers, balloons, themed cakes, 20 kids in the backyard, gift bags. Mine, a happy birthday, mumbled over dinner and a single card with $5 inside. I didn't complain. I just swallowed it and buried it. And the report cards. I made the honor roll. Straight A's. Rachel barely scraped C's, but when parent-teacher conferences rolled around, they fawned over her, telling everyone how talented and creative she was. My teacher handed over my grades. Dad barely glanced at them before asking if Rachel needed a tutor. I started realizing something. Love in my house had a price tag, and Rachel had learned early how to pay it. She'd bet her eyes, throw compliments, and perform her way into their approval like it was a stage she was born on. I didn't know how to do that. I didn't want to. I thought being good would be enough. It wasn't. She got a new phone. I got her old one with the cracked screen and dead battery. She got braces and weekly orthodontist visits. I got told to deal with it when my teeth hurt. She got rides to art class and dance rehearsals. I walked to school in the snow. It was like living in a play I hadn't auditioned for. I was background noise in a house built for her spotlight. Even dinners became a quiet battle. Rachel always got served first, got the biggest piece, and got asked about her day. I ate fast and quietly, trying not to draw attention, because when I asked for seconds or tried to join the conversation, the mood shifted. "Why are you always trying to make it about you?" Mom would snap. "You know how much pressure Rachel's under," Dad would add. Like I wasn't under pressure, too. Like I didn't matter. I started shrinking myself, hoping if I took up less space, they'd stop being annoyed by my existence. But even that wasn't enough. One afternoon, I heard them talking in the kitchen. I wasn't supposed to hear, but the door was cracked just enough. "She's our future," Mom said. "He'll be fine. He's always just there." That sentence burned itself into my brain, just there. Not loved, not celebrated, just there. I stopped asking for things. I stopped talking at dinner. I stopped trying to make them proud. Instead, I started watching, noticing, like how Dad lit up when Rachel entered a room but barely nodded when I did. Like how Mom would touch Rachel's hair, her shoulder, her face, but never mine. Like how Rachel stopped coming to me with secrets and started rolling her eyes when I spoke. One night, I caught her lying about something small, breaking a vase, I think. She blamed me, and without asking questions, Dad grounded me for a week. No phone, no TV. Rachel smirked as I walked past her. That's when I knew. She'd learned she could do anything and still be adored. And I'd learned that nothing I did would ever be enough. It happened 3 weeks after Rachel's 16th birthday. I came home from school and something felt off. The house was quieter than usual, like it was holding its breath. I dropped my backpack by the stairs and saw Dad's truck parked outside. He usually didn't get home until late. Then I heard it. Laughter. Mom's, Rachel's, and a voice I didn't recognize. I stepped into the living room. There she was, my sister, sitting on the couch with a guy I'd never seen, tattoos snaking up his arms, his jeans ripped and sagging. Mom was gushing over them. Dad stood nearby, arms crossed, wearing the same tight smile he always did when he was pretending to be okay with something he clearly wasn't. Ethan, Mom said too cheerily, "Come say hi, this is Marcus, Rachel's fiancé." I blinked. Fiancé? Rachel beamed. "I'm pregnant." Just like that. I looked at her, then at them, waiting for someone to say they were joking, that this was some elaborate prank, but no one laughed, no one said anything. Mom clapped her hands together and started talking about baby showers. Dad offered Marcus a beer, and I stood there, invisible again. Later that night, they called a family meeting. Rachel sat with her arms folded, chin tilted high like she was the queen of the castle. Dad cleared his throat. Your sister's starting a new chapter. We're going to support her." Fully. Mom nodded, which means we need to make some changes around here. Something cold settled in my stomach. "We're turning your room into a nursery," she said casually. "It's the biggest one, and it has the best light." I stared at her. "What?" Where am I supposed to sleep? Dad shrugged. You're 16. You'll figure it out. That was it. No discussion, no alternatives, no apology. Just gone. The place I slept, the one spot in that house that was mine, being handed over to the girl who already had everything. I tried to argue, you can't just throw me out. We're not throwing you out, Mom interrupted. We're just asking you to make a sacrifice for your family, like Rachel has. Like Rachel had? She gets pregnant by some guy who barely finished high school, and I get punished? The injustice sat in my throat like acid. Your grandfather would want you to step up, Dad added, his voice low and threatening. No, he wouldn't. If Grandpa were alive, he'd have flipped that table. He'd have told them how wrong this was, how cruel. He would have reminded them who spent weekends fixing the fence, who never missed a chore, who sat with them through chemo. But Grandpa was gone, and with him, any shield I had left. So I packed one duffel bag, a few books, the clothes I owned, my grandfather's pocket knife. I asked one last time, where do you expect me to go? We're not kicking you out, Mom repeated. You can stay in the backyard for now. So that's where I went. I dragged an old camping tent out of the garage and set it up under the maple tree. It was early fall. Nights were already dipping close to freezing. I layered on hoodies, wrapped myself in every blanket I owned, and lay there listening to the sounds of my family laughing inside. They didn't check on me, not once. The next morning, I went to school like nothing had changed. I washed up in the school bathroom, brushed my teeth with bottled water, and tried to focus in class while my fingers trembled from the cold. I got a job mowing lawns, then 2, then 3. I stayed late at the library to do homework under bright lights because I had no electricity. I told my teachers I was camping for fun. Some bought it, some didn't ask. Rachel's baby bump grew, my tent collected frost. They started hosting baby showers inside music balloons, guests. I'd watch from the shadows, invisible, forgotten. Like, one night I tried knocking on the back door just to get a hot meal. Mom opened it, looked at me like I was a raccoon and said, "You're not starving, are you?" That's when I stopped trying. The final straw came a month later. I was walking past the living room window and caught a glimpse of a framed photo on the mantle. A new family picture. Mom, Dad, Rachel, Marcus, and a printed sonogram. No, me. Not even a mention. I was erased. And in that moment, I realized something that broke whatever was left of me. They never wanted me to come back. Not then, not ever. The cold got worse. It crept into my bones, into my breath, into the corners of my thoughts. I wrapped myself in layers. Hoodies, jackets, socks doubled up, but nothing kept it out, especially not the loneliness that seeped in deeper than the cold ever could. I kept telling myself it was temporary, just until I figured things out, just until I saved up, just until... But the days blurred, the tent started to leak when it rained. My textbooks curled at the edges from moisture. I'd sit with a flashlight clenched between my teeth, trying to read through shivers, solving math problems while my fingers went numb. I still showed up to school, I still tried to act normal. But it was hard to hide the circles under my eyes or the way my clothes hung looser on me. I was skipping lunch to save the few dollars I made. I'd spend them on canned soup, cheap crackers, and day-old bread. Sometimes I'd go 2 days without eating a real meal. My teachers started noticing. One of them, Mr. Caldwell, asked if everything was okay. I nodded too quickly and said I was just tired from studying. He didn't press. I hated that I wanted him to. More than anything, I wanted someone, anyone, to ask again, to not let me lie so easily. But they never did. Or maybe they believed the lies Rachel and my parents had spread, that I'd left because I was rebellious, ungrateful, and troubled. At night, I'd lie awake listening to the sounds from inside the house, laughter, music, the clink of plates. It was like listening to someone else's life, one I used to belong to once. I'd imagine walking through the front door and everyone turned shocked, saying, "We're so sorry, we made a mistake." But that never happened. The door stayed closed. They never looked out the window to check on me. They never left a plate by the back door. They never asked how I was surviving. One night, the wind picked up so strong it ripped the flap off my tent. I scrambled to tape it back down with duct tape I'd salvaged from the garage. My fingers were purple by the time I finished. I curled up into a ball and cried. Not a quiet cry, not the kind you wipe away before anyone sees. The kind that makes your chest hurt. The kind that feels like something inside you is breaking. As that night, I wanted to disappear. Not die, not really, but vanish, fade out of existence, slip into the kind of silence that couldn't be ignored. Thought about Grandpa, about how warm his hands were, about the way he'd sit next to me on the dock and say nothing for hours, but it still felt like everything I needed. If he'd been alive, he would have taken me and no questions asked. But he was gone, and I was alone, completely, undeniably, heart-achingly alone. Then one afternoon after school, I passed by the small bakery a few blocks from school. The windows were fogged up. Inside it looked warm, bright lights, golden loaves, people smiling. I stood there for a moment watching. Maybe I stared too long. Or maybe someone up there finally decided I'd had enough. Because the door opened. A man stepped out, mid-50s, wiry frame, flour on his apron. He squinted at me. "You hungry, kid?" I froze, then nodded. He sighed like it pained him to say it. "Come sweep the floor, and I'll give you a roll." That was how I met Frank. He didn't ask why I looked half frozen or why my clothes were threadbare. He just handed me a broom and pointed at the floor. I swept as my life depended on it, because honestly, it kind of did. When I finished, he handed me a still warm roll. I almost cried again, but I didn't. "Come back tomorrow," he said. And I did. The bakery became my sanctuary. Every morning before school, I'd show up like clockwork. Frank would grunt a hello, toss me a rag or a mop, and I'd clean like I was scrubbing away every bit of the life I'd left behind. The warmth of the ovens, the soft hum of the mixer, the way the smell of fresh bread wrapped around me. It all felt like a kind of healing I didn't know I needed. Frank wasn't a talker. He barked instructions, gave curt nods, and only spoke in full sentences if something was on fire. But over time, we developed a rhythm. I cleaned, organized, and eventually graduated to help with deliveries. Then one day, without warning, he tossed me a bag of flour and said, "You're mixing the dough today." I thought I'd mess it up. I was nervous, hands trembling as I poured, measured, and stirred. But he didn't yell, didn't correct me, just stood back and watched. "You follow instructions," he muttered. Rare is the closest thing to a compliment I'd gotten in months. That night after everyone left, Frank came over with a ring of keys. "You sleeping in that damn tent?" I froze. Yeah, I mean, not forever, just he held up a hand. "There's a cot in the storage room upstairs. Use it. You lock up when I'm gone." He handed me the keys and walked away like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. It was everything. That storage room, it was 4 concrete walls and a tiny window that barely opened, but it was dry. It had a roof. It had a door I could lock. I moved in that same night with my duffel bag and that knife Grandpa gave me. I lay on the cot and stared at the ceiling until my chest stopped feeling like it might cave in. It was the first night I slept indoors in nearly 3 months. The next morning, I woke up early and baked rolls under Frank's watchful eye. He showed me how to twist croissants, how to test dough without over-kneading, and how to keep cinnamon buns from collapsing in the middle. And slowly, the fear in my hands started to fade. I have found peace in repetition. Flour, water, yeast, time. Turns out rebuilding a person isn't so different from baking bread. One day after my shift, Frank sat me down. You got a plan? He asked. Graduate, I said. Then, I don't know, something college, maybe. He nodded. You're good with your hands. And your head, use both. That was the end of that conversation. But it lit something inside me. I started researching online how to get scholarships, trade programs, and community colleges. I applied to night classes while working double shifts at the bakery. I cut back on sleep and junk food, invested in a used laptop with some savings, and started budgeting like a man possessed. Frank noticed. You trying to build an empire or what? Just want a life, I said. Then stop talking, start building. That's what I did. I got my GED and then enrolled in a local culinary program. Used my bakery hours as credit. I picked up extra gigs landscaping on weekends and working stock rooms at night. Every paycheck I saved as my life depended on it. Because it did. And slowly, month by month, the boy in the tent disappeared. In his place stood someone new. I still had scars, emotional ones, the kind that made you flinch at kindness, but I was learning how to carry them better, how to not let them weigh down every moment. Frank never asked about my family, but he knew. He saw the way I stiffened when people brought up home, or how I flinched when someone said parents. He didn't push. He just gave me space and a purpose. Then one day, after nearly 2 years of working together, he said, I'm retiring soon. The words hit harder than I expected. You're the only one I'd trust to take this place. My throat tightened. Me? You earned it, he said. Think about it. I didn't sleep for 2 nights. Then I walked into the county office and registered my name under a business license. 3 months later, the bakery officially became mine. Not inherited, not gifted, earned. It wasn't much. The paint peeled in corners, the oven needed replacing, and the window signs were faded, but it was mine. All mine. And as I stood at the register that first morning as owner, watching customers file in and the smell of cinnamon and coffee filled the air, I felt it. I was no longer surviving. I was living. I was sweeping the bakery floor when the bell above the door jingled. I didn't think much of it, probably a customer wanting a last-minute croissant. But when I looked up, my heart stopped. There they were. Mom, Dad, Rachel, Marcus, and 3 kids I didn't recognize. They looked older, sure, grayer around the edges, but their expressions unchanged. The same entitled smirks, the same fake warmth, the same people who left me in a tent in the cold. Ethan, Mom exclaimed like we'd just run into each other at the grocery store. You look great. This place is adorable. I stared at them, speechless. Rachel pushed forward, her designer purse slung over one shoulder. Nice setup, bro. Real cozy. What do you want? I said flatly. Dad stepped forward, doing his usual fatherly deep voice act. Son, let's not be strangers anymore. We heard you bought a house, a business. That's impressive. I didn't speak. We thought, Mom continued, maybe it's time to be a family again. The kids would love to have cousins. We could help out around the house, cook, clean, move in. I finished for her. Silence. Then Dad nodded. It'd be easier on everyone. I blinked. You mean after all these years? After leaving me out in the cold? Now that I've built something, you want in? We're family, Rachel chimed in, her tone syrupy. It's only fair. Fair. That word hit me like a slap. The fair was me sleeping on the frozen ground while Rachel's wedding was paid for using money stolen from my inheritance. Fair was being erased from family photos. Fair was being left to rot while they built a fantasy around her and her mistake of marriage. I didn't raise my voice. I just looked them in the eye and said no. Mom's smile froze, but no, I repeated, louder this time. You don't get to come back just because I made it. You made your choice. You don't get a do-over. Rachel's face hardened. You're being selfish. I almost laughed. Selfish for protecting what I earned, what was mine from the beginning? I think that was when it happened. 2 days later, I got a letter in the mail, a legal notice. Rachel was contesting ownership of the house. Her claim, since it was family money that funded parts of the bakery and therefore my life, she had rights to it. I read it, then set it down and walked straight to Frank's lawyer. She was a sharp woman named Clara, mid-40s, cut glass voice and eyes like steel. After skimming the letter, she looked up and said, "They're bluffing, but they're not stupid. They'll drag this out to wear you down." "Then I'll outlast them," I said. "We gotta work. Bank records, tax returns, my grandfather's original will." Clara dug deep, so deep she uncovered something even I didn't know. My parents had forged documents to reroute the inheritance after Grandpa's death. Every dime they'd used for Rachel's wedding, Marcus's failed business, even their mortgage, came from funds that were never theirs to touch. Clara grinned. "We're not just defending your house, we're suing them for fraud." Word got out fast. Suddenly, cousins I hadn't heard from in years were calling me. Aunts asked if the rumors were true. Neighbors who once whispered about me now whispered about my parents. Their perfect facade? Cracking. Court dates came. Rachel cried in front of the judge, claiming she thought the money belonged to everyone. Clara presented emails, receipts, and Grandpa's signed letter stating I was the sole heir. Dad's face turned stone. Mom stopped smiling, and I never looked away. I didn't need revenge. I didn't scream or gloat. I just let the truth do what it does best, shine. By the end of it, the judge dismissed their claims entirely, ordered full repayment, labeled the inheritance manipulation as deliberate and deceitful. Rachel stormed out in tears. Marcus cursed under his breath. And I walked out with my head high, the bakery keys in my pocket, and something far more valuable than victory: peace. I thought that once the verdict was in, they'd disappear. But people like them, people who live on performance and perception, they don't go quietly. First came the fallout. My parents were forced to sell their house to pay back what they'd stolen, the same house they'd once kicked me out of. It went up on the market, the listing public. Neighbors whispered, people asked questions, and my parents had no answers that didn't sound like lies. Rachel and Marcus tried to move into a cheap apartment across town, but word spread quickly. The landlord backed out after reading about the court ruling. No one wanted to rent to a family who'd been exposed for fraud. Their names were in the local paper. The headline read, "Family tried to steal son's inheritance, lost everything." Poetic. I didn't gloat. I didn't post about it or tell anyone I told you so. I just kept running my bakery, morning by morning, customer by customer. Business got busier. People came in just to shake my hand. "You did the right thing," they'd say. Funny how strangers could see the truth when blood couldn't. Then came the messages. Rachel sent the first one, a long, teary email about how she didn't know what mom and dad were doing, how she just went along with it because she trusted them, how she was sorry, how she wanted to start over for the kids' sake. I didn't reply. 2 days later, mom showed up outside the bakery. She didn't come in, just stood there watching through the glass. When our eyes met, she raised a hand, half wave, half plea. I turned away. I heard later from a mutual neighbor that dad had picked up a night shift cleaning at a warehouse, that mom was trying to babysit for cash. Marcus left Rachel, taking 2 of the kids with him to live with his mother. They'd lost everything. And yet, I feel triumphant. I felt dumb because justice isn't about watching people suffer. It's about knowing you no longer owe them anything. Not money, not forgiveness, not space in your heart. A month later, Rachel came back, this time with her youngest daughter in tow. She knocked, and for a moment I considered pretending not to be home, but I answered. She looked thinner, worn, like life had finally caught up. "Please," she whispered, "just talk to me." We sat outside on the bakery steps. I don't want anything, she said. I swear, I just wanted you to know. I was wrong. I nodded, let her finish. I let them convince me you were the problem. I thought if I went along with it, they'd love me more, but they used me too, and now I'm just tired. Her daughter clutched her hand. She couldn't have been more than 5. The same age Rachel was when we used to sneak cookies under the kitchen table. I don't expect you to forgive me, Rachel said, tears spilling. But I hope you'll remember who we used to be. I looked at her for a long time, not as my sister, but as someone I used to love. And I said, I do remember, that's why it hurts. She nodded, didn't argue, just whispered, thank you, and left. That was the last time I saw her. Life didn't get easier overnight. There were still days I woke up with that old heaviness in my chest, like a ghost from a time I barely survived. Trauma doesn't vanish, it just gets quieter, but the silence, I've learned to live with it. The bakery became more than a job, it became a symbol of endurance, of ownership, of choosing to break the cycle instead of becoming it. I started a small program out of the back kitchen, the Second Rise, a training workshop for teens aging out of the foster system, kids with nowhere to go, no one who cared. They'd learn to bake, but more than that, they'd learn how to show up for themselves, the way no one ever showed up for me. Frank came by once a month to check in. He'd never say it out loud, but I saw it in his eyes, pride, gratitude maybe, or just that unspoken thing between people who survived something hard and made something good out of it. I never reconnected with my parents. They called once and left a voicemail, mom's voice shaking, saying she missed me. I deleted it, because some doors need to stay closed, not out of hatred, but out of self-respect. Rachel moved out of state, started over. From what I hear, her kids are doing okay. That's all I ever wanted, for the next generation to be better than the last. I don't wish her pain, I just wish her growth. As for me, I'm okay. Better than okay most days. I still keep Grandpa's pocket knife in my drawer. Still fish alone on weekends like we used to. Sometimes I sit by the lake and wonder what he'd say if he saw me now. I think he'd smile. Maybe say, you listened, soldier. There's one thing I tell every kid who walks into my kitchen on day 1. You don't owe anyone your suffering just because they share your blood. It took me years to learn that. Family isn't who raises you. It's who lifts you. It's who sees you. It's who would rather have nothing than take everything from you. Some people spend their whole lives chasing approval from those who'll never give it. I spent mine chasing peace, and I finally caught it. This life, this little bakery, this quiet pride, this freedom, it didn't come easy. It came through fire, but I walked through it, and I came out cleaner on the other side.